The Galactic Council had met in the same enormous chamber for centuries. It was a place built long before humans even learned how to make fire properly. Its walls were made of a smooth stone that glowed on its own, as if tiny stars were trapped inside it. When someone spoke, their voice echoed softly in the circular room, giving a sense that history itself was listening. But on this particular day, something was different. The council members were uneasy. The air felt heavy with tension, even though no one had said a single harsh word. Delegations from dozens of species sat in their assigned seats, adjusting their equipment, shifting on their chairs, or whispering quietly in their own languages. They were all waiting for the same group humans to arrive. The council had invited humans to join peace talks between several powerful civilizations that were close to starting a dangerous conflict. Humans had gained a surprising reputation over the past few decades. Even though they were new to the galactic community, they had shown an unusual ability to understand the emotions and motivations of other species. They adapted quickly, learned faster than almost anyone expected, and showed a willingness to help even when it was difficult. Many considered them useful partners in diplomatic work, but not everyone respected them. To the older species, humanity was still young, an upstart civilization barely out of its cradle. Some believed humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, and too inexperienced to be taken seriously. For them, humans were guests, not equals, and this attitude was exactly what the council carried into the peace talks. At the center of the chamber stood the main table, a large circular platform where representatives of key species gathered. In the past, humans had only been invited to watch from a distance. This year, however, the council needed their help. The situation between the rival species, the Arvalon and the Dretheri, was deteriorating fast. Several misunderstandings and long-standing cultural differences had pushed them close to a breaking point. So the council extended a formal invitation to Earth, saying they wanted human insight, but their real plan was different. Most of the senior council leaders didn't think humans would actually influence anything. They expected the humans to come in, share a few ideas, and then politely step aside while the older species handled the real decisions. Their mistake was assuming humans wouldn't notice. When the human delegation entered the chamber, they did so quietly. Their representative, a calm and composed individual named Leora Chun, walked with a small team behind her. They carried simple tablets instead of fancy tools, wore modest diplomatic clothing, and showed polite smiles to whoever made eye contact. There was nothing dramatic about their arrival, but it still caught attention. Humans always did. Something about their presence felt grounded, like they carried stories of millions of ordinary people behind them. Leora sat down and took a moment to look around the room. She measured the atmosphere quickly. She could sense the unease, the tension between species that didn't trust each other. She could also sense the subtle arrogance of some council members who barely acknowledged her, but she wasn't offended. She had done her homework. She knew the history of the council, the traditions, and the personalities involved. She understood that humans were still viewed as a new experiment in galactic politics. Her job wasn't to be offended. Her job was to help. The session began with the council speaker addressing the room. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of impatience buried beneath his words. He introduced the purpose of the meeting, the urgency behind the rising tensions, and the need for cooperation. He talked for several minutes, describing the dangers ahead and the responsibility the council had to maintain peace. Then he politely gestured to Leora. It was her turn to present the human plan. Leora stood, holding a small device in her hand. She didn't use flashy holograms or dramatic projections like some species did. Instead, she used a simple display that showed clear symbols and diagrams. Her voice was steady, friendly, and confident, but not pushy. She spoke like someone who had spent a lifetime learning from mistakes. Her plan was detailed but easy to understand. She explained how human history full of conflicts, misunderstandings, and negotiations had taught them many lessons. Humans had made countless mistakes through the centuries, but they had learned from them. Her proposal took these lessons and applied them to the current conflict. She talked about communication models, cultural misunderstandings, and methods to create long-term agreements rather than temporary patches. At first, a few members of the council listened with interest. Some nodded thoughtfully, but many others exchanged looks of quiet disbelief, as if unable to accept that a young species could offer something of value. One delegate whispered to another, thinking humans wouldn't notice. They talk like they invented diplomacy. Another muttered, their planet was at war for most of its recorded history. How can they teach peace? Liara heard the whispers, but she stayed focused. She explained how humans had suffered greatly because of those wars, which was exactly why they now valued peace so deeply. Her plan included ideas like shared cultural programs, open data exchanges, joint scientific missions, and neutral meeting spaces protected by both sides. It was thorough, thoughtful, and rooted in real human experience. But the council members who had already made up their minds barely paid attention. When Liara finished, she asked the council speaker if anyone had questions. A few minor inquiries were asked, mostly technical details or polite clarifications. But no one addressed the heart of her plan. No one discussed its potential. No one asked how humans developed these strategies. It was as if they had already decided not to take it seriously. After the session ended, the council members gathered privately in an inner chamber to discuss the proposals. Humans were not invited to this part of the meeting. Liara knew this was tradition, so she didn't protest. She simply returned to the observation area with her team and waited respectfully. Inside the private chamber, the council members reviewed all proposals from different species. It didn't take long for them to dismiss the human plan. A senior member waved a hand dismissively and said humans meant well, but didn't understand the complexity of galactic politics. Another said humans were too emotional to lead diplomacy. Another said the plan was too primitive, even though it was based on centuries of human experience. They didn't reject the human plan because it was bad. They rejected it because it came from humans. Yet, without realizing it, several council members took notes from the human proposal and considered adjusting their own directive using pieces of it. To them, this wasn't stealing. It was strengthening the council's approach. But they also agreed that humans shouldn't be given credit because it might inflate their confidence. When the meeting closed, the council had made its decision. The human proposal would be quietly set aside. The council would move forward with their own directive. The humans would still be invited to participate in discussions, but they would not be treated as contributors, only as observers. The decision was not malicious. It wasn't driven by hatred. It was driven by old habits, outdated beliefs, and an unwillingness to see humans as equals. But what the council didn't know was this. Humans notice everything. And this time, humanity was not going to smile politely and look away. The next morning, the human delegation returned to the main chamber with the same calm, professional attitude as before. They didn't know yet that their entire proposal had been pushed aside in a private vote. They entered with hope, ready to discuss feedback or improvements. Humans always came prepared to adjust, learn, and cooperate, but something in the room felt slightly off. There were small signs, tiny gestures, stiff greetings, awkward silences that suggested the council members had already made decisions behind closed doors. Even the council speaker, who usually maintained a formal yet friendly tone, seemed strangely distant, as if he had already moved past the human contribution. Liara noticed it right away. She observed the way a few representatives avoided eye contact, the way some were already reviewing new documents, and the way conversation drifted away from humans the moment she approached. Her team also sensed it. exchanging quiet glances as they took their seats. A large holographic screen appeared in the center of the chamber. It displayed the new unified directive prepared by the Council, supposedly the collective plan for stabilizing the situation between the rival species. As the document scrolled slowly, line by line, Leora felt her stomach tighten. Parts of the directive looked familiar. Too familiar. There were patterns of communication she had introduced. There were cultural exchange strategies she had detailed. Some sections had been lifted almost directly from the human proposal, rearranged slightly, but unmistakably based on her work. Her team noticed it too. One whispered softly, "These are our models." Another frowned and muttered, "But rewritten." Liara kept her expression calm. She understood diplomacy required steady composure even when something felt unfair. She waited for the council speaker to explain how this document had been formed, just hoping, that there would be at least a mention of the human contribution. There was none. The speaker explained how the directive came from the collective wisdom of long-standing council practices and an experienced group of senior representatives. He spoke with confidence, praising the work of several older species who had apparently shaped the entire plan. He did not mention the humans. He did not mention their proposal. He did not even acknowledge that certain ideas had come from them. Leora's team shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but trying to stay professional. The speaker continued talking, completely unaware of the growing unease among the humans. When he finally opened the floor for feedback, several council representatives praised the directive. One called it a sophisticated piece of work. Another said it was built on centuries of understanding. Another called it the logical way forward. Leora waited for someone to at least note the similarities to the human plan. She waited for basic fairness. Nothing. It wasn't that the council openly disliked humans. They simply assumed that humans didn't need credit, that humans should be happy to participate at any level. To them, humans were still new and should feel honored just to be present. But humans had not traveled across star systems to be decorative pieces. When the council speaker finally turned to Leora and asked politely if humanity had any additional thoughts, she stood slowly. She kept her voice calm, steady, and gentle. There was no anger in her tone. Humans knew better than to let frustration cloud diplomacy. She began by acknowledging the hard work behind the directive. She said she appreciated the effort, and she believed everyone wanted the same thing: peace. Then, she carefully asked how the council had incorporated different proposals from the previous day. She didn't accuse anyone or make harsh statements. She simply asked for clarity. The room grew very quiet. After a long pause, one senior representative spoke. His voice carried the weight of centuries, and he seemed slightly annoyed by her question. He said the council had used only the most advanced models available. Another representative added that simpler proposals had not been suitable for the situation. A third, trying to sound polite, assured her that humanity had done a respectable job for their age, but the council needed a more experienced hand to lead. It was all said with smooth diplomatic language, but the meaning was unmistakable. The human plan had been dismissed, and they were expected to accept that without complaint. Leora did not react emotionally. She had trained for years to control her expressions under pressure. She simply thanked them for the clarification and sat down. Her team, however, exchanged looks that clearly showed frustration. They whispered to her softly, asking if they should bring up the copied sections, the reused strategies, the lack of credit. Leora shook her head. Not yet. The meeting continued with the council making further recommendations, discussing minor edits, and planning the next steps. But the humans couldn't focus anymore. Their minds were stuck on the clear message they had just received. After the session ended, Liara asked her team to gather in a quiet observation room away from the main hall. Once they were alone, she finally dropped the calm diplomatic mask for a moment and let out a slow breath. Her team looked at her. Waiting Got One finally said what everyone was thinking. "They took our work." Another added softly, "and treated us like we should be thankful." Liara stayed quiet for a moment. She didn't want to speak in anger. Humans had worked hard to earn respect in the galactic community, and one emotional reaction could undo years of effort. But she also knew that silence was its own kind of message. She opened her tablet and pulled up the council directive side by side with the human proposal. The similarities were undeniable. It was not an accusation anymore, it was fact. Her team leaned in, pointing out mirrored sections, identical frameworks, even the same sequence of steps. One team member whispered, "This isn't inspiration. This is copying." Another said, "They think because we're new, we won't say anything." Liara felt a quiet, controlled frustration building inside her. She wasn't angry that they had used human ideas. After all, the goal was peace, and any idea that helped was worth sharing. What hurt was the disrespect behind it, the assumption that humans didn't deserve credit, the belief that their voices didn't matter, the quiet expectation that humans would simply accept whatever treatment they received. It reminded humanity of older days on Earth, when emerging nations were pushed aside by more powerful ones. But humans had learned from that history. They knew the importance of self-respect and fair treatment. Later that afternoon, things grew even worse. A document began circulating privately among certain representatives. It was a summary of how the directive had been created. Someone leaked it to the human team. As the humans read it, their eyes widened. The summary described how the council had refined a large amount of human data, reshaping it into a more professional form. It implied that the humans had supplied raw material, not a structured plan. It framed human input as basic, unpolished, and inexperienced. It was one thing to be ignored. It was another to be rewritten. Humans don't mind learning. Humans don't mind asking questions. Humans don't mind growing. But being treated as if their work had no value, that was something they could not quietly accept. Liara closed the document slowly. She didn't speak for several seconds. Her team waited, feeling the tension rise. Finally, she said in a calm but firm voice, "They don't see us. They only see who they think we are." The room fell silent. Liara continued, "And if we let this go, they will keep doing it. Not out of cruelty, but out of habit." Her team nodded. She looked around the room at each member of her delegation. Humanity didn't come here to be decoration. We came here to contribute. And if they cannot treat us as equals, then we need to decide how we respond. For the rest of the evening, the human team discussed every detail. They talked quietly, thoughtfully, without anger. This wasn't about pride. It was about dignity. It was about being treated with basic fairness. By the end of the discussion, the team had a clear understanding. The council had dismissed their work, taken credit for parts of it, and expected humans to simply thank them for the opportunity. They had underestimated the humans. This moment, this quiet, polite dismissal was going to change everything, and the council had no idea what was coming next. When the human delegation returned to the council building the next day, the atmosphere felt heavier than before. It wasn't because the room was louder or brighter or filled with more people. It was something deeper, something that settled quietly in the air. Humans were good at sensing emotional shifts, and today that sense was sharper than ever. Word had spread through the council that humans were unhappy. Not angry, not dramatic, just deeply disappointed. And for some species, disappointment was more worrying than anger. Anger meant someone might shout, argue, or demand an explanation. Disappointment meant something else. It meant someone had already begun thinking in silence, and silence was always harder to fix. Before the session began, Leora and her team walked through the long hallway that led to the chamber. Representatives from other species passed by them, offering polite nods. Some nodded too quickly, trying to appear friendly. Others avoided eye contact in that subtle way that people do when they know something went wrong, but don't want to address it. The humans didn't say anything. They simply walked forward with calm, steady steps. Inside the chamber, the council speaker greeted all delegates and announced that they would review the directive again, this time focusing on implementation. Several species seemed eager to move on, as if the uncomfortable question of how the directive was created no longer mattered. But for humans, it mattered a great deal. Leora sat quietly at her seat, hands folded, eyes focused. She wasn't planning to create conflict. Humans were not looking for drama, but they also weren't going to pretend that everything was fine. Halfway through the session, just as the council was discussing logistical schedules, a digital alert appeared on several screens around the room. It was an incoming report one that had been leaked to the entire chamber. At first, nobody paid much attention. Leaks happened sometimes, usually harmless. But then a representative sitting near Leora stiffened. Another turned their head sharply toward the screen. A third muttered something in their own language that sounded worried. The humans looked at the screen and instantly recognized what it was. It was the internal summary document describing how the council had used human ideas in their directive and how they had downplayed human involvement. The same document the humans had received privately the day before. Now it was public, exposed to every delegation in the chamber. Lines of text scrolled clearly. Human models were used as raw material, refined by senior council members. Human proposal lacked sophistication, but served as a starting point. No official credit required. The room fell silent. Completely silent. Several species looked genuinely shocked. Others looked embarrassed. A few looked away, pretending to focus on something else. The council speaker froze for a moment before quickly turning off the projection, but the damage had already been done. Everyone in the room had seen enough. Leora didn't stand up. She didn't raise her voice. She simply asked, in a quiet and steady tone, "Is this how our work is viewed by the council?" Her words were soft, but they carried across the room like a wave. The speaker cleared his throat and tried to regain control. He said the document was unofficial, not meant to be shared publicly, and probably misunderstood. He said it didn't reflect the council's true opinion of humanity, but his voice was thin and uncertain. Even he didn't seem convinced by his own explanation. Another representative spoke, saying the leak might have been taken out of context. A third insisted the directive was a group effort. Leora let them speak. Humans had learned a long time ago that when someone is scrambling to explain, the truth often showed in what they avoided saying. She waited. Then she stood slowly, the movement drawing every eye in the room. "We came here to help," she said in her calm voice. "Not for recognition, not for status, but for cooperation. That is the purpose of peace talks." Her team watched her closely. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed in a way that felt heavier, more real. "We shared our experience, our history, our failures, and our lessons," she continued. "Not because we think we are better than anyone, but because we know what conflict can cost. We know what it means when people misunderstand each other. And we want better." A few representatives nodded, looking uncomfortable. Others lowered their heads. "But," Leora said gently, "it is difficult to contribute when our work is dismissed publicly and used privately. When our presence is welcomed, but our voices are not." That line struck the room like a soft bell, quiet, but impossible to ignore. The speaker tried to respond, but his words stumbled. He talked about traditions, procedures, historical practices. He tried to create excuses without directly addressing what had happened. Leora listened politely. Then she took a small breath and said quietly, "With respect, we cannot continue like this." The chamber grew even quieter. Some species leaned forward, sensing something important was coming. "Humanity will withdraw from all peace talk participation," she said, "until the Council is ready to treat us as equal partners." The words landed like a stone dropped into perfectly still water. Shock rippled through the chamber. Several representatives whispered urgently to each other. A few stood, clearly distressed. Humans had become more influential than the Council realized, and the idea of losing them from the talks was alarming. The speaker tried again to calm the situation. He asked for patience, for reconsideration, for time to review the issue. But Leora shook her head softly. "We have been patient," she said. "We have listened. We have cooperated. But we cannot stay here only to be ignored." Then she gathered her tablet, closed her folder, and nodded to her team. They stood and began walking toward the exit. The room erupted into whispers and hurried conversations. Some representatives called after them with polite requests to wait. Others tried to stop them with diplomatic pleas. But the humans didn't respond. They walked steadily, without anger, without rushing. It was the walk of a group that had already made its decision. A few species followed them to the hallway, hoping to speak privately. One representative, someone who had always treated humans with respect, approached Leora and said gently, "Surely there is a way to fix this without withdrawing." Leora paused. She wasn't cold or dismissive. She simply said, "When someone forgets your value, the first step is to remind them by stepping away." And then she continued down the hallway. The moment the humans left the council building, something subtle but powerful changed in the minds of many species. For the first time, they understood what it meant to lose human involvement. Humans had become the steady hands, the mediators, the translators of difficult emotions. They saw details others ignored. They helped bridge misunderstandings that no machine or model could fix. And now they were gone. Back in the chamber, the council speaker sat slowly in his chair. His expression was troubled. The other senior members exchanged worried looks. They had expected humans to be polite, cooperative, and patient forever. They had expected humans to smile and nod even when treated unfairly. They had forgotten that respect goes both ways. One representative sighed deeply and said the truth out loud. "We underestimated them." Another replied quietly, "And now we may pay the price." The council had made an error, not out of cruelty, but out of arrogance, habit, and old assumptions. Humans had walked away, and the galaxy was about to discover how much it needed them. When the humans walked out of the council building, the entire place felt strangely empty, even though hundreds of delegates were still inside. People could feel the missing energy, the missing presence. Humans had a way of filling a space not with power or loudness, but with understanding and quiet guidance. And now that they were gone, the absence felt like a space where a light used to be. The council session that followed was uncomfortable. Representatives kept shifting in their seats, looking around as if someone important was late. But no one else was coming. The humans had left, and they had meant it. The council speaker tried to return to the agenda, speaking about schedules and timelines, but even he seemed distracted. He misread notes, repeated lines, and paused awkwardly. It was clear that his mind was not on the directive. His mind was where everyone else's was, on the humans who had stepped out with calm dignity. During a short break, a whisper passed quietly through the room. "Do you think they'll come back?" No one answered. It was too soon to guess. Meanwhile, in the corridors outside, the human delegation was packing their equipment. They weren't rushing, but they also weren't taking unnecessary time. They were quiet, focused, and thoughtful. Their silence was not angry. It was reflective. They felt hurt, not hostile. One team member finally spoke softly. "Do you think they understand what they've done?" Liara closed a case gently and said, "Not yet. But they will." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was simply a statement of truth. When the human transport ship left the landing area, a few representatives watched from a distance. Some looked worried. Some looked confused. A few looked regretful. And some those who still carried old ideas about humans looked surprised that anyone would dare walk away from the council. But even they felt uneasy. Something deep inside them recognized that something had shifted. Inside the council chamber, the work resumed without humans. But the moment they tried to continue negotiating between the two rival species, problems started immediately. The first part of the meeting involved clarifying communication misunderstandings between the two sides. This was normally where humans excelled. Humans had an unusual talent for noticing small emotional signals, small changes in tone, small expressions that meant big things. They could gently explain to one species what the other meant without causing offense. But now that they were gone, those misunderstandings began piling up faster than anyone expected. At one point, the Arvelin representative used a phrase that, according to their culture, meant something neutral and practical. But in the Dretheri language, the same phrase carried a slightly insulting meaning. It wasn't a serious insult, but enough to cause irritation. Usually, a human would step in right away, smile politely, and say something like, "I think what they meant was this," and the problem would dissolve. But today, no one said anything. The Dretheri representative frowned, misreading the silence as agreement. Then he responded with a line that, for his people, meant, "I disagree. But I respect your opinion." Yet for the Arvelin sounded like, "I question your ability." Small ripple of tension spread across the room. The council speaker tried to calm them with general statements about cooperation, but he didn't understand the subtle tones of either culture. His words only created more confusion. One representative leaned toward another and whispered. Humans would have cleared that up by now. The next complication came during a discussion about trade routes. The Arvelin displayed charts with flowing lines and symbols that shifted colors based on priority. The Dretheri used rigid diagrams with shapes that stayed fixed, showing structural meaning. Their systems were completely different, and neither wanted to adopt the other's approach. Usually, humans bridged the gap by creating a neutral hybrid picture, a simple chart that turned both styles into something easy to compare. But today, there was no such chart. The council tried to make one themselves, but it was messy and unclear. Arguments broke out about which symbols to use, which colors meant what, and who should adjust for whom. Another representative whispered, "Without the humans, this is falling apart." But the biggest problem wasn't the misunderstandings or the confusing diagrams. The biggest problem was the lack of trust. Humans had this strange ability to bring a feeling of calm into the room. Their presence made species soften their tone, choose their words more carefully, and try just a little harder to listen. Now that humans weren't in the room, the old habits of stubbornness and pride came back faster than anyone expected. The Arvelin representative spoke more sharply. The Dretheri representative responded with colder language. Others began taking sides without thinking. It wasn't hostility. It was simply the natural effect of not having a neutral guide in the room. By midday, the council speaker called for an early recess. He sat with a few senior members in a private corner. "This is not working," one said quietly. Another added, "We cannot move forward like this." A third whispered, "The humans were supporting more than we realized." That statement hung in the air. It was hard to accept, especially for species who prided themselves on being experienced. Meanwhile, the human delegation's absence was being felt outside the chamber as well. Messages started arriving from trade groups, scientific teams, and cultural exchange committees groups that had long relied on human flexibility and support. Without humans, schedules were confused. Deliveries were delayed. Projects slowed down. People were struggling to adapt to one another without the simple, practical suggestions humans often offered. One message said, "We didn't know how much we depended on them." Another said, "Can you ask the humans to return? We need them." A third said, "Everything is harder without them." Back in the chamber, the council eventually returned for another session. This time they tried to focus on technical matters, believing that facts and numbers would be easier to discuss without humans. But even that didn't go well. The Dretheri used long, complex calculations with layered meanings. The Arvelin used simplified models built on assumptions humans had helped translate in the past. Without humans, the two groups kept misunderstanding the purpose behind each other's numbers. Voices grew frustrated, not loudly, but tired. By the end of the day, the council speaker looked exhausted. He finally said, "We will pause the negotiations until tomorrow." Everyone knew the truth. They weren't pausing the negotiations. They were pausing because they didn't know what else to do. After the session, some representatives gathered in small groups, talking quietly. One said, "Maybe we should invite the humans back." Another replied, "How? After how they were treated?" A third sighed and said, "We have to try." Even the species who had been confident that the council didn't need humans were now realizing something important. Humans weren't valuable because they were ancient or powerful. They were valuable because they cared, because they listened, because they didn't look at other species with assumptions. They tried every single day to understand. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, the humans were back in their temporary quarters, preparing to leave the planet completely. They weren't rushing or panicking. They were moving quietly, thoughtfully. A few team members seemed emotional, but they held themselves with dignity. One whispered, "Do you think they're struggling without us?" Leora gently answered, "If they are, they will learn something from it. And that is good for everyone." Her words carried no pride, only truth. Later that night, messages began arriving at the human quarters. First a few, then dozens. Some were polite, some desperate, some apologetic, some simply confused. The messages all shared the same idea. Things were falling apart without humans, but humans didn't answer right away. They needed time to think, time to reflect, time to allow the council to understand the meaning of equality. The galaxy had always underestimated humans because of their youth. But youth wasn't the weakness everyone assumed. Youth meant flexibility, empathy, the ability to change, to learn, to forgive, and to connect. Humans had walked away not to punish, but to teach. And slowly, painfully, the Galactic Council was learning that lesson. They were learning it through silence, through mistakes, through misunderstandings, and through the empty seat where humans once sat. And in that empty space, the truth became clearer than ever. They needed humans more than they had ever realized. When humans stepped away from the peace talks, the Galactic Council expected a small delay, maybe a few days of confusion. They believed the talks would continue without trouble. After all, the Council had existed for hundreds of years, before humans even discovered faster-than-light travel. How hard could it be to manage a few more meetings without one young species? But very quickly, the truth became obvious. The room where the peace talks normally happened felt heavier than before. Conversations moved slower. Small misunderstandings that humans used to smooth out quietly now stayed on the table, sharp and uncomfortable. Delegates tried to pretend everything was fine, but even they could feel the strain. Something important had gone missing when the humans walked out. At first, the council members did not admit the problem. They were too proud and too used to being the oldest, wisest voices in the galaxy. They kept repeating the same words to each other. The council has survived worse. We will handle it. But inside their minds, a different thought was growing. They just didn't want to say it aloud. The first real trouble started in a border system where two species, the Lurith and the Halvori, had argued for decades about mining rights on a moon filled with rare crystals. Humans had previously created a rotation system, a way for both sides to share without fighting. It wasn't perfect, but it worked because humans had convinced both sides that compromise was better than conflict. Without humans present, the rotation schedule fell apart. One side thought the other was cheating. The other side thought the council favored its enemy. Within days, mining drones clashed, and a small accident happened when two patrol ships refused to move out of each other's path. No one was hurt, but it was enough to send nervous signals through the council chambers. Delegates hurried to fix the situation themselves. They wrote new schedules and argued about fairness, but every time they tried to speak, the talks heated up again. They soon realized that humans had not been lucky when they solved problems, they had been skilled. Humans had a strange ability to understand emotions, to read the room, to sense when someone felt insulted or frightened or lonely. They had a way of making both sides feel heard. Without them, even small disagreements became complicated. Meanwhile, far from the council chambers, other leaders in the council began noticing something else. Trade ships were moving less smoothly. The humans had designed a traffic control system for major space routes, using their deep experience with managing busy air travel back on Earth. Without human supervisors and analysts, the system started facing delays. A single mistake on one route created a long chain of problems on others. Merchants were frustrated. Officials were confused. And slowly, the council's own economy began to feel the pressure. No one wanted to admit the reason, but more and more whispers said the same thing. Humans had become the backbone of many systems, without anyone realizing it. Few brave delegates finally decided to speak the truth during an emergency meeting. We made an error, one said quietly. We pushed away the only group that understood how to balance so many different species. The room went silent. No one wanted to argue, because deep inside, they all knew it was true. While the council struggled, the humans stayed away peacefully. They did not threaten. They did not shout. They stayed firm, calm, and respectful, but they did not return until they were treated fairly. Humanity's quiet resistance made the council even more uneasy. It was easier to negotiate with angry voices than with calm ones that simply refused to participate. In the meantime, human reputation among other species grew even more. Some species that had once mocked humans now praised them. They said humans were honest. They said humans brought fairness wherever they worked. They said humans saw problems that no one else noticed. A few ambassadors even visited the human embassy on their own, asking for advice. But the humans politely reminded them that official talks were still paused. The council attempted to continue the peace talks again. They gathered the remaining delegates, set new dates, and pushed forward, but the same pattern repeated. Small things that humans used to explain now turned into large problems. Even the common translation device, which humans had helped refine, seemed less efficient without human engineers making adjustments. One day, the council tried to move on with the biggest agreement of the peace talks. It was a document so long that it filled an entire wall of the chamber, full of rules, signatures, responsibilities, and detailed promises. Normally, the humans would go through each part line by line, making sure every delegate understood the meaning clearly. Without them, several species misunderstood key sections, leading to a shouting argument between two ambassadors who had never raised their voices before. The council speaker finally had to strike the platform with the ceremonial staff and end the meeting early. It was the first time in years that the council had been forced to close a session, because they could not control a dot at that moment. Even the speaker knew that things could not continue like this, while the council faced chaos. Some members tried to understand why humans were so important. They studied human history and found something surprising. Humans had survived because they learned from endless mistakes. They had lived through wars, disasters, disagreements, and huge cultural changes. And through all of that, they learned how to talk to each other. They learned how to listen. They learned how to solve problems that seemed impossible. The council had once seen this history as a weakness. Now they saw it as the source of humanity's wisdom. Still, pride remained a strong force. Not everyone wanted to admit that the council, the greatest political force in the galaxy, had mishandled the situation. Some leaders insisted that humans should return without apologies. Others believed the council had done nothing wrong. But their numbers grew smaller each day as problems grew larger. Then another incident happened, smaller than the border clash, but more embarrassing. Two species almost walked out of the talks forever because of a misunderstanding about seating order. Normally, humans would rearrange the seating quietly, making both sides feel honored. But without them, the argument lasted for 6 hours and ended with no agreement at all. The council finally understood. They needed humans not just for ideas, but for their presence. Their clarity, their ability to bring calm to any room they walked into. During the next emergency session, the council gathered again. The chamber felt tense, but also tired. The speaker looked around and said, "We can no longer pretend. We must correct our mistake." There were no cheers, but there were nods. Real nods, not out of duty, but out of necessity. The council sent a formal message to the human delegation the same day. They asked for a private meeting and wrote that they wished to review the status of the peace talks. The message was polite, but still too vague. The humans replied with equal politeness, saying they were open to speaking, but that they would not return until certain concerns were addressed. The council speaker knew what that meant. They needed to do something they had not done in a very long time: admit fault. This realization spread through the council members. Some felt embarrassed. Some felt relieved. Some felt frustrated at how long it took to reach this point. But one thing was clear: no one could deny the truth anymore. The effects of humanity's absence had touched every part of the galactic network. The border skirmishes, the trade delays, the tension in the meetings, the frustration between delegates. Each problem was a reminder that the council had pushed away the one group that had been holding everything together. Growing recognition of this mistake filled the council chambers like a quiet storm. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just undeniable. And for the first time in many years, the council prepared itself to apologize, not to a single delegate, not to a single nation, but to an entire species. The day the Galactic Council decided to reach out to the humans again. Something in the great chamber felt different. The delegates sat straighter. The usual confident faces now looked uncertain, even nervous. Everyone knew this moment was important. Everyone knew the council had delayed it for far too long. A message was sent to the human delegation, asking for a formal meeting. This time, the message didn't sound proud or demanding. It didn't sound like the council expected the humans to accept whatever they said. Instead, it carried a tone the council rarely used: sincerity. The humans agreed to come, but they didn't rush. They took their time, preparing carefully. They wanted to make sure that when they returned, they would be seen as equals, not helpers to be used and ignored later. They walked into the council building with calm steps, knowing that every eye in the chamber was on them. The human team entered quietly. They didn't look angry. They didn't look defeated. They looked steady like people who had already decided what they would accept and what they would never allow again. The council speaker stood as they entered. Normally, the speaker didn't stand for anyone. It was a tradition, a symbol of the council's importance. But this time, breaking the tradition felt right. It was a silent apology, even before words were spoken. The humans took their seats. The speaker took a deep breath and began to speak. The voice that usually carried authority now carried something else: honesty. "We have made a mistake," the speaker said. "We failed to treat humanity with fairness. We failed to give proper respect to your ideas, your work, and your experience. We ignored your warnings. We dismissed your concerns. And the consequences have shown us the truth we did not want to see." The entire chamber was silent. Even those who had once spoken against humans now sat with lowered eyes. "We ask you to return," the speaker continued. "Not because the council cannot function without you, but because the council functions better with you. You have proven that your presence brings balance. You have proven that your insight has value. And most importantly, you have proven that you belong here." It was one of the most open, humble speeches the council had given in decades. For a long moment, no one spoke. The humans listened quietly, their faces revealing little. Then the leader of the human delegation finally rose. The entire chamber leaned forward, waiting. "We appreciate your honesty," the human representative said. "And we are not here for conflict. We came to help build peace. That goal has not changed. But respect must be the foundation. Without respect, peace is only temporary." The council members nodded slowly. They knew that what they had done, taking human work, dismissing their voices, ignoring their contribution, had damaged trust. The human representative continued, "We do not want special treatment. We do not want power. We only want fairness. When we sit at this table, we want our ideas to be considered with the same seriousness as any other. We want to be partners, not an afterthought." The council speaker agreed immediately. "You have our word. And this time, our word will be backed by action." The chamber relaxed a little. But the work was far from done, not after the apology. The humans presented the peace framework again, the same one that the council had once dismissed. But this time, everyone listened. They didn't interrupt. They didn't roll their eyes or whisper to each other. They watched, they listened, and some even took notes as the humans explained the details. The council realized something that should have been obvious before. The human plan was the only one that truly understood how unpredictable emotions and misunderstandings could be. It expected conflict, but offered ways to prevent it. It balanced logic with empathy. It recognized that peace needed more than agreements. It needed trust that the council accepted the plan almost immediately. But more than that, they accepted the humans' approach. They began asking for human input on other matters, as well: trade, cultural exchanges, travel routes, shared research. Humans were no longer being pushed aside. They were being invited, and that one moment stood out more than all the others. The council speaker looked at the human delegation and said quietly, "You are no longer the newest voice here. You are now one of the most trusted." Hearing that, the humans felt something they hadn't felt since joining the council: respect that wasn't forced or fake, but real. The peace talks resumed the next day. The energy in the chamber changed immediately. Where arguments once erupted, now conversations flowed. Where misunderstandings had piled up, now there was clarity. Humans worked calmly, moving from one delegate to another, easing tensions, explaining complex ideas in simple ways, and bringing comfort where anxiety lingered. It wasn't magic. It was simply the way humans interacted, with patience, with empathy, with humor when needed, and with the kind of emotional intelligence most species didn't naturally have. Some aliens even whispered to each other, "The humans are doing it again." But this time, it wasn't said with mockery. It was said with relief. As days passed, alliances strengthened. Agreements that had been stuck for years finally moved forward. Two species who had once avoided speaking to each other were now working on a joint plan to rebuild damaged border stations. Trade routes began to stabilize, and the border system where mining tensions had risen was now calmer than it had been in months. Humans never bragged. They never said, "We told you so." They simply kept working. And slowly, the galactic community realized something deeper. Humanity did not lead through force. They did not lead through power. They led through connection, through understanding, through the simple belief that cooperation mattered. Weeks later, the peace treaty was finally ready to be signed. It stretched across a massive hollow display, glowing softly in the center of the chamber. Delegates from every involved species stood around it. Everyone looked tired but hopeful. The council speaker stepped forward and invited the human representative to initiate the signing. It was an honor the council usually reserved for the oldest, most powerful species. Giving it to the humans was a clear message. The galaxy had changed, and humans had helped guide that change. The human representative placed their hand on the panel, activating the signature sequence. One by one, delegates added their own marks. As each signature appeared, a quiet feeling spread through the room, something rare, something precious. A feeling that the galaxy was healing. When the final signature was added, the chamber erupted into gentle applause. Not loud cheers, just honest appreciation. After the ceremony, delegates from many species approached the humans personally. Some apologized. Some thanked them. Some asked how humans managed to stay patient through everything. The humans simply smiled and said, "We're used to complicated problems. Back home, we're still solving them every day." Later, as the chamber slowly emptied, the council speaker approached the human representative once more. "Today marks a turning point," the speaker said. "Not just for the peace talks, but for the entire galaxy. We believed we knew everything. We believed age meant wisdom. But you have shown us a different kind of wisdom, one that does not come from centuries of life, but from understanding that mistakes can lead to growth." The human representative nodded. "We all learn, no matter how old we are." The speaker smiled. "And we are still learning from you." When the humans finally left the chamber, they felt lighter. They didn't feel victorious. They didn't feel superior. They simply felt satisfied because the galaxy was moving toward peace, and they had helped make it happen. Outside, countless species watched them with newfound respect. Some waved. Some offered small gestures of gratitude. Humans returned the warmth, feeling a deep sense of purpose. For the first time since joining the council, humanity felt truly seen. And across the galaxy, countless worlds whispered the same truth. The council had once viewed humans as the youngest species, but now